he reacted? What was he saying? Because
I love you.
How many times was he struck before you said he kind of lost consciousness?
At least 2 or 3 times I was hitting him in his arms. He had his arms up. And he's so tough, just taking him in his arms.
What was he saying?
He's down on the ground, he says, I love you. And I go, where? Right here on the butt. And he goes, and then I just killed him. Hit him a couple more times and took a knife.
So before he lost consciousness, the only thing he was saying to you the whole time as you were striking was that I love you, I love you.
He told me a couple of times, I love you.
Yeah.
Today's story stands apart from the usual cases we cover, where suspects often lie, deny involvement, or try to manipulate the truth. In this case, the suspect is strikingly different. He openly confesses to every detail of his actions. While honesty might seem like a positive trait in this context, it's deeply unsettling and chilling. On the morning of November 11th, 2023, police in Ohio rushed to the Gullia home after a 911 call reported an unresponsive man. What they found inside was chaos wrapped in silence. Theodore Gullia, the patriarch of the family, was lying upstairs, cold to the touch and bearing obvious signs of violence. His wife, Anna, had been the one to call. She explained to officers that she had spent the previous day with her daughter Claire and only returned home around 10 a.m. that morning. The house should have been quiet, ordinary. Instead, she walked straight into a nightmare. Her husband was lifeless, and her son, Robert J. Gullia, had been the only one home with him. Police quickly noted the unease in the house. Theodore's injuries suggested blunt force trauma, but the positioning of the body raised questions. Blood patterns hinted that he hadn't died where he was found, but rather had been moved. Already the story was shifting into something darker. The scene was not just a tragedy. It was the beginning of an investigation that would tear apart the Gullia family from the inside. The house was silent except for the shuffle of officers moving through its rooms, documenting every detail. Theodore Gullia's body lay cold and battered, clear evidence of a violent struggle. His head and face showed signs of blunt force trauma, but the positioning of the body told another story. It didn't belong where it was found. Blood on the hallway walls contrasted with the body staged in the bedroom, making it obvious that someone had moved him. Whoever did this wasn't just killing, they were trying to rewrite the scene. Almost immediately, suspicion began to settle on one name, Robert Gullia, better known as RJ. He had been the last one with his father, and his story didn't line up with what investigators were piecing together. His mother, Anna, insisted she had stayed the night at her daughter Claire's house, returning late the next morning only to stumble upon the horror. His brother Ben was at work until he rushed home, devastated by the news. That left only RJ alone with their father during the critical hours. And yet, when questioned, Robert spun a version of events that bordered on the unbelievable. He claimed he'd been calling his mother for cigarettes that morning, that he had heard noises in the night but thought little of them, and, most bizarrely, that someone else must have broken in to kill his father and left the scene in a way that would frame him. It was the kind of story that sounded like a bad excuse the moment it left his mouth. Detectives knew it, his own family knew it, his owner. And before long, Robert would be sitting in an interrogation room, facing the questions that would break apart his lies. When detectives finally sat Robert down in the interrogation room, the tension was heavy. At first, he stuck to his story. Someone had broken in, someone else had killed his dad, and somehow he was just the unlucky one left behind to look guilty. But the officers weren't buying it. His answers were inconsistent, and every detail he gave seemed to unravel under even the simplest questioning. The shift came when detectives pressed him about the blood, the body being moved, and the obvious signs of staging. Slowly, Robert began to bend. He admitted he had struck his father, though at first he tried to soften it, claiming he just wanted the pain to end, that he hadn't meant for things to go so far. But then the confessions tumbled out. He described grabbing a steel baseball bat, hitting his father as he sat unsuspecting. He recalled breaking his arm, knocking him to the ground, and then, almost casually, pulling a knife to cut his father's throat, claiming it was to end it quickly.
He took a knife and just tried to slit his throat because I didn't want him to feel any more pain.
What stood out most wasn't just what Robert said, but how he said it. His tone was flat, detached, like he was explaining a chore instead of a murder. He even admitted to dragging the body, crossing his father's arms as if arranging him for some twisted ritual, before covering his face. At moments, he'd slip into regret, saying he didn't know why he did it, insisting it felt like something had snapped in his head. But those flickers of emotion only made the rest of his cold recounting more chilling. Detectives kept him talking, encouraging his confessions by nodding and reassuring him he was doing the right thing. They knew they were sitting across from someone with no real remorse, just fear of what came next. Robert wasn't broken down by guilt. He was broken down by being caught. As the hours dragged on, Robert grew more comfortable speaking, almost as though confessing gave him relief. He admitted that there wasn't an argument, no heated exchange leading up to the attack. Instead, he claimed it was a sudden impulse, describing it as if something snapped in his mind. He said he stood behind his father, baseball bat in hand, and decided in that moment to kill him. He struck Theodore again and again, first at his arms as his father raised them in defense. Theodore's desperate words, "I love you, man," echoed in the room as Robert repeated them for detectives. His father had said it more than once, trying to reach the son who was mercilessly beating him. But Robert didn't stop. He told investigators he kept swinging until his father collapsed, then used a knife to try to end it quickly. What chilled the detectives wasn't just the violence, but the way Robert described it. He spoke of his father's toughness, how he took the blows, almost admiring the man he was killing.
2 or 3 times I was hitting him in his arms. He had his arms up. They're just so tough, just taking him in the arms.
What was he saying?
He's down on the ground. He says, "I love you."
He admitted that once the attack was over, he couldn't stand the sight of the body. So he dragged his father into a bedroom, positioned him in the shape of a cross, and covered his face with a piece of clothing, claiming it was to show respect because of his father's faith. At times, Robert slipped into self-pity. He said he wished he could hug his dad again, that he hadn't meant for it to go so far, but those words rang hollow. His description of washing the bat in the sink, of casually pointing out where the knife still sat on the desk, showed how little true remorse he felt. By now, detectives understood they weren't dealing with a son who had lost control in the heat of an argument. They were sitting across from someone who had made a choice, cold, deliberate, and final. And despite his moments of feigned regret, it was clear that Robert was not sorry for killing his father. He was only sorry that now, there was no way back. Once detectives had Robert's confession on record, everything else fell into place. The crime scene told the same story his words had painted. Bloodstains mapped the path of the attack. The sink still bore traces of the bat he had rinsed, and the knife sat exactly where he said it would be. Forensic teams confirmed Theodore's cause of death. Blunt force trauma to the head with multiple fractures, followed by stab wounds that showed a desperate attempt to end what the beating had already started. The community was stunned. Theodore Nelson was remembered as a hard-working father, a man who had done his best to provide, and now the son he had raised was being charged with his murder. News reports painted the case as both brutal and senseless, sparking debates about youth violence, mental health, and the fragile line between family bonds and unthinkable betrayal. Robert faced a long list of charges, but the most serious was second-degree murder. His defense team tried to argue diminished capacity, pointing to his odd behavior and emotional instability, but the jury wasn't swayed. The brutality of the attack, the lack of remorse, and his own matter-of-fact confession left little doubt. He was convicted and handed a lengthy prison sentence, one that would keep him behind bars for most of his life. In the end, the case of Robert Nelson was less about motive, and more about the horror of the act itself. No one could ever fully explain why he turned on his father that day. Some believed it was buried resentment, others thought it was the crack of untreated mental illness. But what everyone agreed on was this: the crime had torn apart more than just one life. It left a family destroyed, a community shaken, and a father's final words, "I love you, man," haunting the story forever. Today, the case of Robert stands as one of those tragedies that people still struggle to wrap their heads around. He remains in prison, serving the sentence that followed his conviction, and very little has changed in terms of public understanding. There was never a clear motive, no inheritance dispute, no long history of abuse, no financial desperation that usually explains parricide. Instead, it was an act of sudden and shocking violence that left everyone searching for answers that never came.